The Galactic Confederation had existed for 12,000 years, and during all that time, they had known peace and prosperity beyond anything humans could imagine. 17 different alien species had come together under one banner, and they had built something beautiful together. They had cured diseases that once killed millions, and they had solved the problems of hunger and poverty and war. The Elysians, with their pale blue skin and gentle ways, had led the Confederation from the beginning, and they believed that all intelligent life could find common ground through dialogue and understanding. The Tellurians were gentle giants who stood 3 meters tall and had never raised a hand in anger against another living being. The Velthari were beings of pure light who communicated through colors and patterns, and they found the very concept of violence to be incomprehensible. All of these species had evolved beyond their primitive instincts, and they looked at the universe with wonder rather than fear. They had no armies because they had no enemies, and they had no weapons because they had no need for them. Then everything changed when the Vraxith came from the darkness between galaxies. No one knew where they came from, or why they had chosen this galaxy as their target, but their intentions became clear very quickly. The Vraxith were a swarm intelligence made up of billions of silicon-based organisms that moved as one mind, and they consumed everything in their path. They did not want to negotiate, and they did not want to trade, and they did not want peace. They wanted to feed. The first world to fall was Serenity Prime, and it was home to the Melodari, who were known throughout the galaxy for their beautiful songs. Within 3 days, the Vraxith had consumed every living thing on the planet, and then they moved on to the next world. High Chancellor Torvan received the news in his private chambers on Nexus Station, and he felt his heart sink with despair. He had led the Confederation for 200 years, and in all that time he had never faced a crisis like this one. His advisors gathered around him, and they spoke of evacuation plans and diplomatic missions, and ways to communicate with the swarm. But Torvan knew in his heart that none of these things would work, because the Vraxith did not think like other species. They were not evil in the way that the Confederation understood evil, and they were simply following their nature. They consumed because that was what they were designed to do, and they would keep consuming until there was nothing left. 4 more species fell in the next 2 cycles, and entire civilizations that had existed for thousands of years simply vanished. The Confederation fleet tried to stop them, but their ships were designed for exploration and trade, and they crumbled before the swarm, like leaves in a storm. Called an emergency session of the Grand Assembly, and representatives from every member species gathered in the Great Hall on Nexus Prime. The mood was dark and frightened, and many of the delegates had lost family and friends in the attacks. Torvan stood before them, and for the first time in his long life, he did not know what to say. "We have no warriors," he finally admitted, and his voice echoed through the silent chamber. "Our peacekeeping forces were never designed for this kind of threat, and our ships cannot stand against the swarm. We need soldiers, and we need them now, or we will all perish." A murmur ran through the assembly because the word soldier was almost foreign to most of the species present. They had forgotten what it meant to fight, and they had forgotten what it meant to kill, and they had no idea how to remember. Then someone in the back of the chamber spoke up, and all eyes turned to the small delegation from Earth. Ambassador Kira Voss was a woman in her 50s, with gray streaks in her dark hair, and eyes that had seen things that would make most Confederation species faint. Humanity had only joined the Confederation 18 months ago, and they were still considered newcomers and outsiders. The other species looked at them with a mixture of curiosity and concern, because humans were different from everyone else. They still had armies, and they still had weapons, and they still remembered how to fight. The Confederation had accepted them reluctantly, and they had spent the past 18 months lecturing humanity about the need to evolve past their violent tendencies. Now those same species were looking at the humans with desperate hope in their eyes. Kira felt her communicator buzz against her hip, and she checked the message quickly. It was from Earth Command, and it contained only 3 words that made her heart beat faster. She stepped forward, into the light, and every eye in the chamber focused on her. "The Confederation asked for soldiers," she said, and her voice was calm and steady. "Humanity will send something better. We will send our predators." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap, and many of the delegates did not understand what she meant. But Torvald understood, and he felt a chill run down his spine despite the warmth of the chamber. He had read the reports on humanity, and he had studied their history, and he knew what they were capable of. They were not like the other species, who had evolved toward peace and harmony over thousands of years. Humans had evolved in the opposite direction, and they had become the most efficient killers their planet had ever produced. They had hunted their own megafauna to extinction, and they had fought wars against each other that killed millions. They had developed weapons capable of destroying entire cities in a single flash of light. And now they were offering to unleash all of that violence against the Vraxith. Torvald wanted to refuse, and he wanted to find another way, but he knew there was no other way. The Vraxith would keep coming, and they would keep consuming, and eventually there would be nothing left. "How soon can your forces be deployed?" he asked, and his voice was barely above a whisper. Kira smiled, and it was not a warm smile. "They are already on their way, High Chancellor. The wolves have been sleeping for a long time, but they never forgot how to hunt. The Vraxith have made a terrible mistake by coming here. They thought they were the apex predators of this galaxy. They were wrong." Far away on Earth, the message had already spread through classified channels, and military bases around the world were coming to life. Project Fenrir had been activated, and the soldiers who had been waiting in the Kant Ein, already above you. Shadows for years were finally being called to action. They were not ordinary soldiers, and they were not peacekeepers or diplomats. They were hunters, and they were predators, and they were about to show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. The Vraxith had no idea what was coming for them. They had consumed dozens of worlds and destroyed countless civilizations, and they had never encountered anything that could stop them. But they had never encountered humans before, and humans did not know how to stop. The galaxy had asked for soldiers, and humanity was going to answer that call in a way that no one expected. They were going to send the monsters that lurked in the darkness of human history. They were going to send the predators that had made humanity the dominant species on Earth. And when the Vraxith finally understood what they were facing, it would already be too late. The hunt was about to begin. Colonel Daniel Hayes stood in the briefing room of Orbital Defense Platform Liberty and looked at the soldiers assembled before him. These were not ordinary men and women, and they had not been chosen for this mission because they were brave or loyal or patriotic. They had been chosen because they were dangerous. Every person in that room had spent years learning how to hunt and kill the most dangerous prey in the universe, which was other human beings. They were ghosts who operated in the shadows, and they were wolves who had been trained to destroy anything that threatened the pack. Hayes himself had served in conflicts that the public would never know about, and he carried scars both visible and invisible from decades of silent warfare. His face was weathered and hard, and his eyes held the cold patience of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He activated the holographic display, and images of the Vraxith destruction filled them. "Room, you have all read the reports," he said, and his voice was calm and measured. 17 worlds have been consumed, and 4 entire species have been wiped from existence. The Confederation has been fighting the Vraxith for 6 months, and they have not won a single engagement. They have lost every battle, and they have retreated from every world, and they have watched helplessly as billions died. The soldiers studied the footage with professional interest, and Hayes could see them analyzing the enemy. They were looking for patterns and weaknesses and opportunities that the Confederation species had missed. Sergeant Maria Santos was a compact woman with dark hair and eyes that revealed nothing of what she was thinking. She had spent 15 years in special operations, and she had been declared dead twice by official records. "What is their weakness?" she asked, and her voice was flat and emotionless. "Found one," Hayes replied. "But the Confederation does not think like we do. They have been looking for diplomatic solutions and ways to communicate with the swarm. They have been trying to understand the Vraxith and find common ground." Lieutenant Kyle Morrison laughed, and it was a harsh sound that held no humor. He was tall and lean with the build of a distance runner, and he had once tracked a target across 3 continents without rest. "You cannot reason with a locust," he said. "No," Hayes agreed, "but you can exterminate them." Commander Lisa Park stepped forward, and she was the strategic mind behind the entire operation. She had planned campaigns that toppled governments, and she had designed operations that changed the course of history. Her mind worked like a computer, and she saw patterns where others saw only chaos. "The Vraxith communicate through a high frequency," she explained, and she pulled up new data on the screen. "Display. Page. Every organism in the swarm is connected to every other organism, and they move as one mind. This is their greatest strength, but it is also their greatest vulnerability. Disrupt that frequency, and they lose coordination. They become confused and disorganized, and they cannot function effectively." Santos leaned forward with sudden interest, because she understood what Park was suggesting. "They have never faced an enemy that could adapt to their patterns," she said. "Exactly," Park confirmed. "Every species they have encountered has been reactive and defensive. They run and they hide and they try to survive. We are going to be different. We are going to be proactive and aggressive and relentless. We are not going to defend against the Vraxith. We are going to hunt them." The room was silent as the soldiers absorbed this information, and Hayes could see the shift in their posture. These men and women had spent their careers being the hunters rather than the hunted, and now they were being asked to do what they did best. They were being asked to track and pursue and eliminate a threat that had terrified an entire galaxy. Master Sergeant Paul Griffin spoke up, and he was the oldest soldier in the room. He had gray hair and a quiet manner, but his record spoke of decades of impossible missions completed without failure. "The Confederation species are afraid of us," he observed. "They brought us in because they were desperate, but they do not trust us. They think we are monsters." Hayes nodded, because Griffin had identified a truth that could not be ignored. "They are right to be cautious," he admitted. "We are monsters, and that is exactly what this situation requires. The Vraxith have been spreading through the galaxy like a plague because no one had the will to stop them. No one had the nature to fight, but we do. We have spent 10,000 years fighting each other and killing each other and perfecting the art of war. Every weapon we have ever created was designed to destroy other humans who are just as smart and just as dangerous as we are. The Vraxith are terrifying, but they are not human. They are not as adaptable, and they are not as creative, and they are not as ruthless. We are going to show them what happens when you threaten our galaxy." The mission was designated Operation Harvest, and it would be the largest military deployment in human history. 12 carrier groups would spread across Confederation space, and 50,000 soldiers would be deployed to hunt the Vraxith. But numbers alone would not win this war, because the Vraxith outnumbered them by billions to 1. What would win this war was something that the Vraxith had never encountered before. Human beings were persistent hunters who had evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They did not give up, and they did not retreat, and they did not stop until their target was dead. The Vraxith were about to learn what it felt like to be hunted by creatures who had spent millions of years perfecting the art of the chase. Staff Sergeant Carmen Ortiz checked her weapons one final time as the briefing concluded. She was young compared to some of the others, but she had already proven herself in a dozen black operations. "When do we deploy?" she asked. "Immediately," Hayes replied. "The Confederation is losing worlds every day, and we do not have time to waste. Your teams will be inserted behind enemy lines within 48 hours. Your mission is to disrupt and destroy and terrify. Make them afraid. Make them understand that they are no longer the hunters. They are the prey now." The soldiers filed out of the briefing room, and Hayes watched them go. With something like pride. These men and women were the best that humanity had to offer, and they were also the most dangerous. They were weapons that had been forged in the fires of human conflict, and sharpened by centuries of evolution. The galaxy had asked for soldiers, and humanity was sending something far more effective. They were sending predators who had been bred for one purpose: to hunt, and to kill, and to survive. The Vraxith had made a terrible mistake when they came to this galaxy. They had thought they were the apex predators, and they had thought nothing could stop them. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The wolves were awake, and they were hungry, and they were coming, and nothing in the universe was going to stop them. The Battle of Kethros Station would be remembered as the moment the galaxy finally understood what humanity truly was. Kethros was a mining colony that belonged to the Tellurian species, and it was home to 300,000 gentle giants who had never known war. The Tellurians stood 3 meters tall, and their bodies were covered in soft gray fur, and their eyes were large and kind. They had evolved on a peaceful world, where cooperation was more valuable than competition, and violence was simply unknown to them. When the Vraxith swarm appeared on their sensors, the Tellurians did what they had been taught to do. They sent a distress signal to the Confederation, and they prepared for evacuation, and they prayed that help would arrive in time. They expected rescue ships, and diplomatic envoys, and perhaps some peacekeeping vessels to cover their retreat. Instead, they got the destroyer Relentless. Captain Sam Carter stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the Vraxith swarm approach on the tactical display. The swarm was massive, and it contained millions of individual organisms that moved together like a single living wave. Each organism was about the size of a large dog, and it had sharp, crystalline teeth and multiple limbs designed for grasping and tearing. They communicated through a hive frequency that allowed them to coordinate with perfect precision, and they attacked like a single massive predator. Lieutenant Commander Nina Wells was Carter's executive officer, and she studied the numbers with professional calm. Standard Confederation response would be to evacuate the station and sacrifice it to the swarm, she reported. The Tellurians cannot fight, and we are outnumbered approximately 10,000 to 1. Carter smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf that had finally found its prey. "Then it is almost a fair fight," he said. Launch the disruption drones were small devices that had been designed specifically for this purpose, and they scattered into the swarm's path like seeds on the wind. Each drone emitted a frequency that interfered with Vraxith communication, and the effect was immediate and devastating. The perfect synchronization of the swarm faltered, and organisms began colliding with each other in confusion. The living wave that had consumed 17 worlds suddenly looked less like an unstoppable force, and more like a swarm of confused insects. "Now," Carter ordered, and his voice was calm and cold. "Fire teams are weapons-free. Show them what humans can do." What followed was not a battle in any traditional sense of the word. It was a hunt. Human soldiers equipped with pulse rifles and tactical armor moved through the chaos with deadly precision. They communicated through hand signals and neural implants, and they worked together like a pack of wolves, bringing down larger prey. Sergeant Antonio Reyes led his squad through the outer corridors of Kethros Station, and they hunted the Vraxith organisms that had breached the hull. The creatures were terrifying to look at, and their crystalline bodies reflected the emergency lighting in strange patterns. Their teeth could tear through metal, and their limbs could crush bone, and they had destroyed entire civilizations without mercy. But to Reyes, they were just targets. "Contact at 12 o'clock, his point man called out. Reyes raised his rifle and sighted down the barrel at the Vraxith organism that was scuttling toward them. It was moving erratically, because the disruption drones had confused its connection to the hive mind. "Drop it," Reyes said, and he squeezed the trigger. The pulse round caught the organism in what passed for its head, and it collapsed in a shower of crystalline fragments. "Keep moving," Reyes ordered, and his squad advanced through the corridor. "There are more ahead." Throughout the station, the same scene repeated over and over as human soldiers hunted the Vraxith with ruthless efficiency. Corporal Jenny Blake held a choke point alone for 17 minutes while her squad evacuated a group of terrified Tellurian children. She killed 43 Vraxith organisms during that time, and she did not retreat a single step. Private First Class Marcus Cole tracked a group of Vraxith through the maintenance tunnels, using nothing but his instincts and a combat knife. He eliminated all 12 of them before they even knew he was there. Sergeant Maria Santos led a counter-assault that pushed the swarm back from the main civilian shelter. She moved through the enemy like death itself, and the Vraxith could not touch her. On the bridge of the Relentless, Captain Carter coordinated the battle with cold precision. He watched his soldiers fight, and he felt something like pride in what humanity had become. They were not just soldiers, and they were not just warriors. They were the end result of millions of years of evolution that had shaped humans into the perfect predators. They could adapt to any situation, and they could overcome any obstacle, and they could kill anything that threatened their survival. The Vraxith had evolved to consume and destroy, but they had never faced anything like this before. They had never faced creatures who hunted them back. When the battle was over, the swarm had been reduced by 93%, and the survivors were fleeing into the darkness of space. It was the first time in recorded history that a Vraxith force had retreated from a battle. The Tellurians emerged from their shelters, and they found human soldiers standing guard with weapons ready. The station was damaged, but it was still intact, and the people who lived there were still alive. Kethros colony, and he approached Captain Carter with wonder in his large eyes. "You saved us," he stammered, and his massive frame was trembling. "How did you do this? How did you fight them when no one else could?" Carter holstered his sidearm and looked at the gentle giant who stood before him. "We have been fighting things that wanted to kill us since before we climbed down from the trees," he explained. "The Vraxith are scary, but they are not the scariest thing we have ever faced." "What is?" Corin asked. Carter met the elder's eyes, and there was no warmth in his gaze. "Each other," he said. "We spent 10,000 years learning to kill the most dangerous predator in our solar system. That predator was us. Every weapon we have and every tactic we use was designed to destroy other humans. The Vraxith are dangerous, but they are simple. They consume and they destroy, and that is all they know. Are so much more than that. We are hunters and we are killers and we are survivors, and we are just getting started." Word of the Battle of Kethros spread throughout the Confederation, and for the first time there was hope. The unstoppable swarm had been stopped, and the invincible enemy had been defeated. But along with the hope came fear, because the galaxy was finally beginning to understand what humanity was. They were not peaceful explorers who had stumbled into space with wonder in their hearts. They were predators who had conquered their world through violence and cunning and sheer stubborn refusal to die. And now those predators had been unleashed upon the Vraxith. The swarm had made a terrible mistake when they came to this galaxy. They had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. They had given the wolves a reason to hunt, and now nothing would stop them until the hunt was finished. Word of the human victory at Kethros spread through the galaxy like wildfire, and it changed everything. The Confederation species who had spent months living in terror finally began to hope again. But the Vraxith also learned from Kethros, and for the first time in their existence, they experienced something their hive mind could not process. They experienced fear. The swarm had consumed thousands of worlds across multiple galaxies, and they had never encountered prey that fought back effectively. They had never encountered creatures who hunted them instead of running away. The Vraxith began to change their tactics, and they started avoiding direct engagement with human forces. They would attack Confederation worlds, but they would retreat the moment human ships appeared on their sensors. This was exactly what humanity had been waiting for. On the bridge of the carrier Apex, Fleet Admiral Catherine Shaw coordinated the largest military movement in human history. Operation in human history. She was a tall woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen 100 battles, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a true predator. 12 carrier groups were spread across Confederation space, and 50,000 human soldiers were hunting the Vraxith on 100 different fronts. The Vraxith are adapting, Commander Derek Cole reported from his station. They are avoiding direct engagement with our forces, and they are becoming harder to pin down. Good, Shaw replied, and there was satisfaction in her voice. That means they are learning to be afraid. Now we teach them the next lesson. Operation Shadowfall was designed to take the war directly to the Vraxith and end their threat forever. Human strike teams would operate independently behind enemy lines, and they would systematically attack Vraxith reproduction nodes. They would not just fight the swarm, they would eradicate. Sergeant Major Patricia Quinn led one such team to the dead world of the Ceros 4, where the Vraxith had consumed all life 3 cycles ago. The planet was nothing but rock and dust, and massive organic structures where new swarm organisms were grown. Quinn and her team dropped from orbit in a stealth shuttle, and they landed without detection in a valley filled with crystalline spires. "Stay sharp," Quinn ordered through her helmet communicator. "The swarm knows we have been hitting their reproduction nodes. They will be watching for us." Staff Sergeant Carmen Ortiz moved up beside her commander and scanned the alien landscape with her rifle scope. "I see movement on the ridge," she reported. "At least 100 organisms, but they are keeping their distance." Quinn studied the enemy positions, and she understood immediately what was happening. The Vraxith were afraid to engage them directly, but they were also afraid to abandon their reproduction node. They were caught between 2 competing instincts, and they did not know what to do. "Corporal Harris," Quinn called out, "set the charges on the primary structure." "Yes, ma'am," Jake Harris replied, and he moved toward the massive organic building with his demolition pack. He was young, but he was one of the best explosive experts in the entire military, and he worked with quick, efficient movements. Quinn watched the Vraxith on the ridge, and she could almost feel their confusion through the tactical display. They had never encountered prey that attacked them so brazenly, and they did not have a response programmed into their hive mind. They simply watched as the humans moved through their territory, with complete confidence. "Charges set," Harris reported, after 10 minutes of careful work. "Ready to detonate on your command." Quinn took one last look at the Vraxith watching from the ridge, and she felt something. Like pity for them. They had traveled across the void between galaxies, and they had consumed countless worlds, and they had thought themselves unstoppable. Now they were about to learn what it meant to face a true predator. "Let them watch," she said. "Let them tell the others what happens when you threaten our galaxy." She triggered the detonator, and the reproduction node vanished in a column of fire that lit up the dead world like a second sun. The Vraxith on the ridge scattered in terror, and Quinn watched them flee with cold satisfaction. Across 100 fronts, the same story repeated, as human strike teams hunted the Vraxith with relentless efficiency. They destroyed reproduction nodes and supply lines, and communication hubs. They attacked without warning, and disappeared without a trace. They made the Vraxith afraid to sleep, and afraid to eat, and afraid to do anything except run. Confederation observers accompanied many of these missions, and they reported back to High Chancellor Torvon with growing unease. "They do not fight like any species we have ever encountered," one observer reported. "They do not defend, and they do not negotiate, and they do not show mercy. They simply attack and pursue and eliminate. They are not soldiers. They are apex predators." Torvon reviewed the reports in his private chambers, and he felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had invited humanity into the Confederation because he had no other choice. He had unleashed their violence upon the Vraxith because the alternative was extinction. But now he was beginning to wonder if he had traded one threat for another. His aide Lyris pulled up the historical files that humanity had shared with the Confederation. Wars and genocides and extinction events stretched back through thousands of years of human history. They had hunted their own megafauna to the brink of extinction, and they had fought each other with weapons that could destroy cities. Violence was woven into their very nature, and they had never evolved past it the way other species had. "They did warn us, Chancellor," Lyris said quietly. "Their entire history is one long story of predation. They told us what they were, and we invited them in anyway." Torvon stared at the holographic display, showing human forces systematically dismantling the Vraxith threat. "We had no choice," he replied. "The question now is whether they can stop once the Vraxith are defeated. Can they turn off the violence that we have unleashed? Or will they simply find new prey to hunt?" Far away on the front lines, Patricia Quinn led her team to another target, and she did not think about such questions. She was a soldier, and she had a mission, and she would complete that mission no matter what it cost. The Vraxith had threatened her galaxy and her people and her home. They had to be stopped, and she was going to stop them. That was what predators did. They hunted, and they killed, and they protected what belonged to them. The Vraxith were learning this lesson the hard way, and soon there would be nothing left of them but memories. The hunters had become the hunted, and there was nowhere in the galaxy they could hide. Humanity was coming for them, and humanity never stopped. The chase would continue until every last Vraxith understood that this galaxy was no longer their hunting ground. It belonged to the predators now. The final battle took place above the Vraxith homeworld, and it was the moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy forever. The planet was a nightmare of silicon spires and organic processing plants that stretched across the entire surface. This was where the collective intelligence of the swarm resided, and this was where the war would finally end. Fleet Admiral Catherine Shaw stood on the observation deck of the carrier Apex and watched the human fleet arrange itself for the killing blow. 200 warships formed a ring around the planet, and 50,000 soldiers waited in dropships, ready to descend. They had chased the Vraxith across 200 light-years and destroyed 98% of their swarm. Now they were poised to finish what they had started. Commander Derek Cole approached the Admiral with a troubled expression on his face. "Ma'am, we are receiving a transmission from the planet's surface." Reported. "It appears to be coming from the Vraxith collective intelligence. They are trying to communicate with us." Shaw raised an eyebrow, because the Vraxith had never attempted communication before. They had simply consumed and destroyed, without any interest in dialogue or negotiation. "After all this time," she said, "put it through." The voice that emerged from the bridge speakers was artificial and strange. The Vraxith had captured translation software from one of the worlds they had consumed, and they were using it to speak for the first time. "Why do you pursue us?" the voice asked. "We only consume to survive. It is our nature. We do not choose to destroy any more than you choose to breathe. Why do you not understand?" Shaw considered her response carefully, because she knew this moment would be recorded and studied for generations. Behind her, a delegation of Confederation observers waited in silence, and they were recording everything. High Chancellor Torvon stood among them, and his pale blue face showed no emotion. "We understand perfectly," Shaw replied, and her voice was calm and steady. "Survival is nature, and consumption is nature, and we do not blame you for what you are. But evolution is also nature, and adaptation is also nature. You consumed 17 species because you could, because they could not stop you. They could not adapt to the threat you posed. We can." There was a long pause before the Vraxith spoke again. "We will retreat," the voice said. "We will leave this galaxy and find other feeding grounds. Territories far from your people and far from your worlds. We will never return. Is this not sufficient?" Shaw shook her head, even though she knew the Vraxith could not see her. "No," she said, "it is not sufficient. If we let you go, you will recover. You will grow, and you will multiply. Eventually, you will run out of prey in whatever corner of the universe you flee to. And then you will come back. We do not leave threats alive to strike at us again. It is not our nature." The Vraxith was silent for a long moment, and when it spoke again, there was something in its voice that might have been understanding. "You are more dangerous than we calculated," it said. "More predatory than any species we have ever encountered. We came to this galaxy believing we were the apex predators. We believed nothing could stop us. We were wrong." "Yes," Shaw agreed. "You were." She terminated the communication and turned to face the Confederation observers. Torvon stepped forward, and his expression was unreadable. "You are going to destroy them completely," he said, and it was not a question. "We are going to neutralize the threat," Shaw replied. "We'll survive because we are not genocidal, Chancellor. We are practical. We will preserve enough of the Vraxith to maintain their species in controlled habitats where they can be studied and contained. But they will never threaten the galaxy again. They will live to remember why." Torvon moved closer and lowered his voice so the other observers could not hear. "What about humanity?" he asked. "You have shown the galaxy what you truly are. Some species will be grateful for what you have done. Others will be afraid, very afraid." Shaw met his gaze, and there was no apology in her eyes. "Good," she said. "Fear keeps people honest, and it keeps predators at bay. But here is the thing about humans, Chancellor. We are predators, yes, but we are also pack animals. We protect our own. The Confederation is our pack now. Anyone who threatens it will learn what the Vraxith." Torvon studied her face for a long moment before asking his final question. "And what is that?" Shaw turned back to the observation window and watched as the first wave of dropships descended toward the planet's surface. "That when you hunt the galaxy, eventually you run into something higher on the food chain," she said. "Something that does not run, and does not hide, and does not stop. Something that hunts back." The final assault began, and humanity showed the galaxy what they were capable of. It was not a battle, but an extermination carried out with surgical precision. When it was over, the Vraxith threat had been eliminated, and the galaxy was safe. 3 standard years later, Ambassador Kira Voss addressed the full Galactic Confederation as humanity was granted permanent membership. "You invited us into your family because you were desperate," she acknowledged. "You feared what we were, and you had good reasons." Reason. Our history is soaked in blood and our nature is violent. But that same capacity for violence that terrifies you is also what saved you. We are protectors because we know better than anyone what predators can do. She looked around the chamber at the representatives of species who had lived in peace for millennia. "We will not change who we are," she continued. "We will not apologize for our nature. But we will promise you this. As long as you are part of our pack, nothing in this universe will harm you without going through us first. The galaxy asked for soldiers. Humanity will always answer, because that is what predators do. We hunt, and we protect, and we never ever stop. The chamber erupted in applause, as tentacles and limbs and appendages of a dozen species rose in celebration. Among them, the humans stood quietly with patience in their eyes. They were not celebrating. This was simply what they were. They were the guardians now, and they would protect their pack until the end of time. The galaxy had asked for soldiers, and humanity had sent the predators. No one escaped. And now, those predators had found their purpose. They had found their pack, and they would never let anything threaten it again.